This is a topic I've been meaning to address for some time. I don't know how to approach it because modern day development of video games is very formulaic, very controlled, very beat the dead horse until the customer coughs off the wallet that was theirs in the first place. Many modern remakes of video games are feeding off the nostalgia of the prior entries that for the time, and still to this day, hold up relatively well in the gameplay department. Graphically, it can vary, but I am very guilty of this, especially with the Resident Evil series, as they're finally remaking the literal game changer of the series. But that's not why we're here. If you haven't noticed the trend on this channel, I absolutely love survival horror. 9 playlists of game playthroughs and 4 reviews dedicated to horror alone. This one was different. This wasn't Resident Evil, this was a brief glimpse on my radar when the Sphere Hunter mentioned in my YouTube feed that Signalis was her game of the year. That one sentence alone caused me to buy it, and then not touch it for months. After the utter disappointment that was the Callisto Protocol, I decided to dive back into it, and 8.5 hours later, and yes, this would be my Game of the Year pick for survival horror as well. Developed by Rose Engine and published by Humble Games, this masterpiece of horror was crafted entirely by 2 German developers. I didn't make that number up either. In the credits of the game do the names Yuri and Barbara constantly come up for pretty much everything. Signalis began development back in 2014 as a 2D side-scroller game with point-and-click elements that drew inspiration from movies like Alien and Blade Runner, themes about dreams, isolation, surrealism, and a genuine love of dark sci-fi. Themes I'm sure won't Stephen Hay their way back into this game as subtly as I do with my totally consistent upload schedule.
I swam all the way from China for you to be a disappointment.
Initial setbacks given due to experience and tempered ambition. Throughout the years though, the project would revamp as the pair learned how to properly develop a game. Around 2016, it changed perspective to an isometric camera that has low poly 3D and pixel art that blends relatively well together into an impressive array of models and art. In 2020, a Kickstarter was proposed, but Humble Games came along that allowed the pair to pursue their passion properly. With the addition of Humble and a lot of positive press, the game picked up a lot of traction really quickly, which allowed the game to be ported to all modern consoles. Though there was a brief worry because developers were working with a build from 2016 which would have years of work scrapped, but through a combination of luck and goodwill, everything worked out perfectly. Released 27 October of 2022, it came with overwhelming positive reviews on Steam, meaning something clearly was done right. You play as Elster, an Elster-class replica unit who is assigned to the vessel of Penrose 512, a scout ship meant to search the stars for habitable planets, valuable resources, or anything that could be of value to the nation of Yusan. That's all I'll say for the story for now, as I want to save it for later in the story section. Right off the bat, the immediate comparison is to both Resident Evil and Silent Hill. You have a very limited inventory space of 6 slots that forces you to carry only the bare essentials to survive. Save rooms with item boxes, puzzles that require you to pay attention to the environment and read through documents scattered about, stories that is drip-fed through said documents that both explain characters and the greater world around. Navigation plays a key part as more of the environment opens up the longer you explore. Backtracking is an essential part that requires multiple trips to gather items, solve puzzles, and make it to the next area. You have a map that you can bring up at any time that automatically updates with unlocked, locked, and key doors along with any plot-relevant environmental items to interact with. You also get access to a radio that can be tuned to certain kilohertz frequencies and be turned on and off at any time. You can use it to solve puzzles, find items, and to defeat certain enemies. Combat is a mixed bag with your standard array of firearms such as a handgun, shotgun, SMG, rifle, revolver, and a flare gun that all have their uses. You also have defense items if they get a bit too close with the single-use stun baton, and thermite flares to burn bodies. Utilizing the Crimson Head revival mechanic from Remake, you can temporarily put them down, but they require a thermite flare or a shot from a flare gun to burn their body effectively. The radio is used during vivid sequences where the frequency will briefly flash and you'll have to change quickly to it to whittle them down before eventually killing them. Firearms can be used while moving, but movement is heavily restricted to a slight shuffle, and standing still will get you an accuracy bonus once the reticule shrinks. After an enemy falls, you'll need to rush and stomp them in order to prevent them from getting back up. Damage isn't restored with standard medical items, but repair patches, sprays, and auto-injectors. You're a robot after all, which can slowly restore health over time with different variations, which can either restore instantly or slowly. Auto-injectors can be equipped as a tool item and used automatically if too much damage is taken to revive you, or used to restore a large amount of health, which can be tracked by the status screen and by the character's movement as well. You also get access to tool items, which are required to progress through the game. An optical eye that allows you to take a picture of your screen to save, which can be useful to reference for puzzles at any point. The other being a flashlight module which will allow you to explore and interact with the environment in dark areas of the game. Each of them will take up an item slot that you can only use either or. Through both the combination of pixel art and 3D assets, the environmental storytelling is told through both the environment itself and the various files found throughout the game. Sierpinski Facility is a mining and munitions factory that exists to serve the great nation of Yusan. You have various different levels dedicated to the various replicas and Gestalt working within the station. Mines to gather the raw material, and said factory above to turn those materials into munitions. Medical wards and an ore elevator to transfer material to the upper floors. Later on, you enter into an apartment complex that acts as a multifunctional community with stores, tram station, stores on the lower level, and so on. The atmosphere is meant to be oppressive throughout and hardly ever lets up except for a few times when you enter in a save room, where even still you don't feel exactly safe. With the advent of replica units, technology on a grander scale is stagnant, meaning you have these advanced biomechanical humanoids who can work without sleep, without hunger, without complaining, only to have CRT monitors, cassette tapes, and ancient tech that we of the modern era would hardly bat an eye at. Even the weapons feel beefy, going from the handgun to the SMG. Each of them sound and feel right. The stun baton can arc to enemies close by, and even just hitting a single one can sound much louder than you would originally suspect. Even your own movement can give you away if you're trying to sidestep enemies, walking to avoid triggering them through noise. Speaking of those enemies, if they spot you, their screech to announce your arrival is beyond inhuman, and it unnerves you the first time you hear it. You even enter into a corrupted world later on that follows a level of dream logic with how it transports you about the place. Mounds of flesh slowly taking over the steel environment you had grown accustomed to, believing for a moment that you could very well be in hell. The music is a combination of ambiance and original tracks created by Cicada Sirens and A Thousand Eyes, with the exception of classical musical pieces that can be heard playing through cassette tapes or vinyl records. Many of the original tracks act as their own ambiance when no active track is playing. There is no bombastic music meant to be a grand epic orchestra fit for a sci-fi epic. The tracks evoke a sorrow in you, even borderline depression, as they're just as oppressive as the atmosphere of the game. If you've played Silent Hill 2, much of it will feel familiar as they blend in naturally with the environment. The few combat tracks are reserved for bosses, which have a slight synth and electronic feel to them, but again, nothing is too overly bombastic and fits almost naturally. A survival horror game is, well, survival and horror, so how is it? It's very good. Unlike the modern take on horror, jump scares are non-existent. The horror is what you don't see. Sure, fighting the monsters can seem scary, and you can jump at the screams, but that isn't what makes this game absolutely terrifying. The themes of isolationism and surrealism take front stage on much of this game's length. The atmosphere alone can genuinely unnerve you as you traverse, but it's also the character interactions that really sell this game. As you traverse along the game, you encounter other replica units that, despite being biomechanical beings, are more human than their Gestalt counterparts. One in particular was a Calibri unit, which acts as a PsyOps mind reader and a mental stability unit. They work in unison with each other through bioresonance. Essentially, a group of 5 or 500 can act as one unit. Though, as the Calibri become corrupted, more and more of them are cut off from each other, until eventually you find one that is hiding in a library, distraught and terrified. She explains to you that the others she was connected with are no longer in unison with each other. She can't see their thoughts, and while they are there physically, the corruption had forced her out as she was disconnected from the network. And while she's safe, she notes she can't go on and wishes she had become like the others, professing she at least wouldn't be alone. Jesus fucking Christ. If you haven't caught on by now, this isn't exactly the most coherent story you'll go through, and there were a lot of questions I still had even after finishing it. I'll try and break down some of the plot, but a lot of it is disjointed. And it'll make sense once you play, or it won't, and you'll break down and cry like I almost did. You play as Elster, and are searching for your Gestalt, which is the name for humans on Sierpinski Facility on the planet of Lang. Waking up in your crashed ship, you explore the surroundings and find that the ship is empty, and the cryopod that is meant to house your Gestalt only contains a broken card. Heading out into the snowy environment and coming across a perfectly circular hole that descends down into the earth. At the bottom, there is a hole in the wall that goes into what seems to be a signal station. The hole you came through now vanishes as you examine a book, The King in Yellow, before a transmission comes through. The intro plays, and you awake in the bathroom of Sierpinski facility as the game begins proper. It's clear that this story operates on dream logic, and trying to come up with a logical explanation for the events happening will only confuse you more. You'll do a transition to an area, pick up an item, only to return with that item in the real world. Again, trying to interpret it isn't going to make you understand this place. The opening area does a lot to convey to you the basic concepts without a giant prompt flashing on screen telling you what to do. Propaganda posters litter the environment, giving an in-universe explanation on why you can only have 6 items at a time, that everyone can hear you run, and you probably shouldn't do that. You have redacted documents scattered about, and banned words and language, along with other replica units going about their business despite the outbreak taking place in the facility. You find another replica injured who is surprised to see you're even there, showing her a photograph of the woman you're attempting to look for to see if she might even know where she is. She mentions that all the Gestalt went down into the mine, and those of you perceptive enough might have noticed that the picture you picked up in the ship is of a white-haired woman, while the one you showed is of a brunette. And to that I say, shut up, don't worry about it. Going deeper into the facility, you encounter a Gestalt who goes by Issa. Immediately, I'm drawn to Silent Hill with Kaufman, but unlike other media, this isn't just a blatant ripoff of the source material, nor is it a reference fest. The word you're looking for is inspired, and by that, that's what this game feels like. She explained that she's here to find someone despite the Lovecraftian horror overtaking the facility. So in that, you and her share a common detail. You both go your separate ways after meeting. And that is where I'll leave it for non-spoiler sections, as the game from here on has spoilers on many, along with many of the concepts that are explained and the greater details fleshed out. Ideally, you should go into this game as blind as possible in order to experience the game without my stupid opinion influencing you. And if those first few seconds didn't really set it, allow me to hit it on the nail again. This game explores a lot of dark concepts and topics that aren't really YouTube friendly. Even after finishing this game, I felt down because unlike Silent Hill, I feel like shit. You'll be reading a lot of personal diary entries committing acts of privacy invasion and parts that explore the darker sides of humanity as a whole. So from this point forward, I'm going to talk about those, so skip to here if you want to go to the end. Searching around Sierpinski, you take note of an infection that has ravaged both the Gestalt and replicas alike, starting as a flu-like symptoms before escalating to internal hemorrhaging and cognitive decline. Once they die, a cancerous growth consumes them before they reanimate into an almost feral-like state, a process that did not happen overnight, but what seems like a series of weeks that slowly drained the facility of both personnel and morale. Life within the station wasn't great either. The great nation of Yusan took extreme measures to keep their people in check in what seems like a constant surveillance state, in a sense similar to 1984. Documents stating banned words and phrases, and books banned on certain topics. People punished for minor infractions and interrogated, creating an environment of paranoia that only escalates with the infection. Other replicas are about the facility operating as normal, while others aren't well. Replicas who are biomechanical beings that display varying levels of emotion, from fear, depression, sorrow, and even displaying levels of affection for other units or even Gestalt. Based on prior statements, it is clear this game doesn't operate on the laws of reality as we know them. Trying to make sense of what the game presents will only leave more answers than questions that even now I still don't know how to answer. Dream logic, as it were, is the key mechanic that the game operates from. As mentioned before, on occasion you'll go into certain segments like a dream or even a flash forward, find an item there, and then return. You have that item as part of your inventory. Trying to interpret it as something reasonable or tangible or something that we know as reality can be far too difficult to explain, so here's Maxwell the cat. The issue it can possibly present is that while all of this is going on, there exists a whole universe outside of Sierpinski and Rotfront. When Resident Evil or Silent Hill ended, beyond the nightmares there was a world, a place you can go back to and have a cup of coffee once it was all said and done. This game has the difficult challenge of breeding a world from what is essentially nothing, to create a society, history, culture, backgrounds, mechanics, lore, all within a span of a couple hours, and exclusively through text documents and NPC conversations. It also makes the assumption that the player is capable enough to perceive these and interpret those documents as a tangible world. And there is a world here that is worth exploring that I can only hope will be fleshed out, if not in a game, but a novel, comics, or other forms of media. It does have the occasional blunder, but from what I've read, I am entranced with the world. Getting back on track, upon exploring the facility further, you encounter a minor class replica before running into Adler, an administrative class replica whose job it is to, well, maintain the admin side of all that's happening. Just by sheer look, he has the confident, smug attitude of a dude who has a stick so far up his ass that he'd show it through his mouth if he tripped. Speaking of, as Elster shows Adler the photo, he remarks it as one of the Gestalt we know as Lena, before he pushes her down the elevator shaft. Awakening is Issa in what looks to be a school, you go searching for a friend before seeing a white-haired girl being beat up by 3 girls in masks. We then return to Elster, who awakes from a pile of Elster units that literally fill the elevator shaft, but all we can comment on is that the elevator doesn't work. Yeah, I suppose that is a problem now, isn't it? Further exploration has you suddenly cut to Issa knocking on the door of the commander, with Adler not far behind her. Eventually, we find our way to the commander, or Falk unit, which is by far the most powerful replica we've come across, but she lays unconscious or dead on the bed before you. A diary nearby reveals that she knows she is dying and willingly locks herself away into her quarters without much preamble or fuss, stating that the red eye beyond the gate has corrupted her and her mind, while being able to produce her own memories and thoughts, now shares them with another. Visions of a silvered-haired woman she yearns to see again, the documents outside her quarters give greater insight into Falk units as a whole, more specifically their persona or personality, if you will. Replicas are what I can only gather based on in-game documents and lore given to me within the game, and some research on my own. My interpretations are probably wrong, but that's okay. That's the fun part about speculation here. They're made from what I can best guess are scans of Gestalt who have their memories suppressed and placed into these biomechanical bodies, each replica having specific memories and patterns they follow based on their unit types. More than likely, it's who that Gestalt was based on which becomes the model type for that unit. They have the ability to have some level of humanity while none of the emotional downsides of them, though you're advised on certain parameters when interacting with replicas, unless their memories resurface and begin to conflict with their programming. In order to prevent that, you give them an item or object to suppress it. An example given is a teddy bear. Alternatively, avoid their triggers in a sense. The game designates them as fetish items, and they should be used to keep their memories in check. Star units are a security team, the police, if you will, which requires guns as a fetish item. Calibri units are a collective unison that prefer a well-stocked library to keep in check, though many of them keep diaries that keep their minds grounded. You're advised that not keeping this persona in check could compromise the integrity of a unit and cause it to be decommissioned, as their own memories and those of their Gestalt patterns begin to merge and conflict with what they truly know. Though their personalities and personas may differ, one thing that keeps all these replicas in common with each other: bioresonance. What exactly bioresonance is, that is a mystery. What we do know is that different units have different degrees of said bioresonance. It allows them certain abilities like with the Calibri and their ability to communicate in unison or reading minds and maintaining mental cohesion. A Falk unit has one of the higher degrees of bioresonance that allows them to bend the wills of weaker minds and fathom their intentions, emotions, and allowing them to command. Bioresonance allowed the nation of Yusan to break off from the Empire and explains without that resource, Yusan would have been crushed under the heel of imperial rule before it even began. It practically changed society as a whole, and throughout the course of a century, bioresonance has allowed Yusan to flourish and develop such replicas as the Falk unit, though with the advent of bioresonance, technology as a whole stagnated and caused all the focus to be put into this new technology. It's why you see CRT, cassette, floppy disk, and the like around the environment. One note describes that as powerful as this technology is, we hardly understand it, and can't even replicate it with the current technology that Yusan possesses. even leading you to believe that Yusan has grown entirely dependent upon this technology. Yet, within a bookstore, there is banned material that suggests a more spiritual suggestion to bioresonance as a whole, suggesting that there exists a connection between all Gestalt that many have, but few can truly understand. Even fewer can use this ability, and too often than not, fear that power they don't understand, though those who can use it manipulate the essence of the world. One such individual, the Grand Empress, was so powerful that she bent humanity into the empire of Yusan and lifted them to the stars, imbuing life into the machine servants that now carry the weight of Yusan upon their shoulders. Getting back on track, the Calibri used their abilities to read into the mind of Adler and noted that his persona was corrupted and he had memories of an Elster unit. There was no Elster unit at Sierpinski. The offer was on the table, but the commander fell ill and the idea was scrapped. Adler was well aware they had fallen out, and his Gestalt memories began to resurface. Writing entries in his diary, he had no recollection of writing, and out of fear of being decommissioned, kept his crisis a secret from the others. Nearby, you'll also discover a file on Elster units that are described as loners and scouts, meant to work alone and thrive in those circumstances, though the original neural pattern was lost and new Elster units are made from the copy of a decommissioned one. What this implies is that replicas were made with a very specific purpose in mind, and with the incident at Sierpinski, that lie, has led to situations that they couldn't prepare for. Their personas cracking, and something I mentioned before, developing emotions, showing genuine fear, depression, love for their fellow units, as they try to hold on to what little memories that they can retain while reality itself is crumbling around them. Finding another diary in a box locked away, you get a greater insight into Adler as a whole. His persona had broken far earlier than you had realized, and his Gestalt memories and his own were muddled and began to blend into each other. Seeing images of a silver-haired woman, out of fear, he suffers in silence, though all answers tend to indicate that the mind below the facility could hold a key. Upon entering the elevator, you get a scene of Issa being hunted by Adler, as he mentions that she shouldn't be here. Issa, however, gets a drop on him as she stabs him in the eye as he drops down a hole. Eventually, you run into Issa again being attacked by what I can only assume is an amalgamation of the monsters forming into this nightmare. After defeating it and tending to Issa, you find another staircase heading up and leading to a gate where Adler is laying before you. As he says, the commander went out into the waste, and when she returned, something in her had changed. You enter into this wasteland, images and voices telling you not to be afraid, images of Elster, Ariane, and Alina, implying that this isn't the first time you've been here, and that this is one of many cycles that has happened before. Finding dead Elster units surrounding what looks to be the Penrose vessel you had awoken from in the beginning of the game. Attempting to open that vessel, Elster is damaged in the event, losing her arm and being severely damaged before she fades and dies, and the game ends. Yet this isn't right. The game ends so abruptly after leaving so much unanswered, so much desired. I need to know more. Maybe another playthrough, just to analyze and get more answers. Yes, that's it. I'll start again and... Why is she wearing a cute hat? Why is everything working? The next time you load up the game, you awaken to a ship that hasn't crashed and seems to be in working order and deep in space. Inside the ship, you'll get access to certain material that you weren't privy to in the crash one. You'll find journal entries from Ariane that have the two of you enjoying life together and watching war movies and listening to music. Oh. Furthermore, there are clear discrepancies between this version of the ship, the crash version, and Sierpinski. The photo you found at the beginning is of a silver-haired woman named Ariane, while the brunette is of Alina on Sierpinski, meaning that the Elster we play as are different units. The one on Sierpinski and the one on the Penrose are two different Elsters that we didn't even notice, though it is clear there is some blending of the memories between the two. It would also seem that based on the ungodly amount of corpses in the elevator, and those in the waste, that this cycle of Elster units has been happening for quite a long time, and we just happen to be the one that makes it as far as they have in this timeline. Back on the ship, you search around, exploring the new environment, and happen upon documents that give you more backstory to the world at large. A guide that says despite how tasty your Elster unit looks, synthetic skin isn't going to help you when you're starving. Furthermore, there's a document that, unlike any others encountered so far, that asks you to open it. It gives you that choice that isn't presented in any other document in the game. If you choose to break the seal, it has a comprehensive breakdown of instructions for Elster units, and the triggers to avoid as not to disrupt their personas. You shouldn't give them photographs. Oh shit. You shouldn't have them watch war movies. Oh no. You shouldn't have them listen to music. Oh fuck. And most importantly, do not attempt to befriend the Elster unit. I'm sure it'll be fine. Though this whole thing comes full circle when you think about it. The document was never opened in all this time, meaning that Ariane naively didn't read the instructions for the person who eventually became her friend, and clearly more. Holy shit, the depression is building. Eventually, you'll return to the damaged Elster unit we had left off, as since our last time playing, damaged and barely clinging on to life. Finding a way into the corrupted ship, you find another dead Elster unit next to the cryopod, corrupted by some mass of flesh. Inside the ship, you'll find notes of an Ariane that is clearly distraught, in pain and suffering, a far cry compared to the peace you had just gone through. Scavenging parts and armor off of her, you make your way down a series of holes before arriving at a shoreline that recites a poem of something more, something eldritch in nature, that should have stayed buried, of something that walked when they ought to have crawled. Arriving in the final area of the game, Rotfront gives you a new series of puzzles and challenges to complete, allowing even more of the world to open and give greater explanation to everything we've seen and adding context, explaining what is also known as the Red Eye, a storm that occurs on the planet and makes the sky a blood red that covers that planet. Many assume it to be an omen, almost pareidolia, of the oppressive surveillance state they live in, while scientifically the storm has been explained. An entire culture and even a holiday was made around it. You also get more background on Ariane, noting she had a clear obsession with paintings, music, and even access to forbidden literature that gave her more of a free spirit than Yusan desired, and they had hoped the military would straighten her out. Upon being released from that service, she volunteered for the Penrose program to get away from everything and finally experience a freedom she had never truly been given since her time in the mountains. Exploring the apartment complex, you eventually run into Issa for a final time, now severely wounded, and laments she couldn't find her sister, the person she had been looking for this whole time. And to twist the knife one last time, she collapses into a mass of flesh that is all too familiar to Lisa. There is also an undamaged version of the photograph you had carried around since the beginning of the game, and on it you'll see Alina and a woman that looks all too familiar to Elster, meaning that this is possibly the Gestalt that the neural pattern Elsters are based upon. So, does this mean that Alina saw her friend die and then live long enough to see her resurrected with muted emotions in a shell of who she once was? It would explain a lot, as the Gestalt that Elster is based upon is a veteran, and thus showing them war movies is a potential trigger for disrupting this persona. It also confirms that we are indeed living two Elster timelines, where one is connected to Alina and the other to Ariane. Each Elster acting as the main hero of their story, intending to keep a promise, and each iteration making it further than the last. What we play now is that Elster that pushed past all those failed attempts. That reality is repeating itself endlessly, with the story remaining the same. Adler had remarked that he had seen this scenario played out countless times, that she was disrupting the reality around them. In the final area of the game, you traverse a hallway that explains that it wasn't a virus or a bioweapon that had infected and killed the Gestalten replicas, but of the corruption of reality. That each loop of us attempting to keep the promise is destroying reality with each iteration of Elster and Ariane, Elster and Alina, of Erika, Issa. Each time this loop repeats, reality itself further breaks down until a certain point where nothing can be fixed, nothing can remain, and life itself is destroyed. The first corrupted and to fall ill was the Falk unit. The commander, as it is revealed, she is fully aware of Elster's journey, from a crashed ship, through a strange gate, through a hole in the ground, an island beyond reach, a promise, a search for someone lost. She was confused, lost, as the memories of her own and Elster's blended together, to where she believed she was dancing with Ariane, to that song, feeling the yearning and that desire to be reunited with each other. The final room returns to Falk, who, unlike before, rises and scolds you, stating that she will never dance with us again, that the two are incomplete and must become whole. Though if you recall, Falk units have the ability to change reality around them, that even though she is clearly corrupted, has her functions as a Falk unit, teleporting you to different arenas and corrupting your screen as you attempt to fight. Once she is defeated, you get a brief glimpse of Elster holding Ariane before the image is juxtaposed with Elster and Falk, stating that they are now whole again. You head outside, seeing the red eye happening once more before a corrupted Adler unit stops before you, giving you a warning to not do this again. The two of you attack each other before shooting Adler while Elster has her eye stabbed. Returning to the ship once more, you're finally able to pry open the ship that had been locked away for so long. Inside, the truth is finally revealed, as the final documents give us the reality of what this promise is, of what it is meant to be. After the false ending, you get a message stating you've completed 3,000 cycles or days into this mission, and that if you haven't found a place to set up shop, there's no point in prolonging the inevitable, that you should close up shop, and in an effort to not suffer, have your Elster units make the end painless. You also get notes into Ariane's mindset, going from relieved and optimistic to finally being away from home, to finally be yourself, to the onset of boredom before eventually befriending the Elster unit, and then stir crazy before her health begins to fade. Lamenting that she doesn't want to die, but she doesn't want to live anymore either. Eventually, you find the original Elster unit, slumped over and dead in the room as you say, "I wasn't able to keep our promise." This is the one and only time she acknowledges a dead Elster unit, meaning that this is the original, that everything else beyond it is a copy, and that Elster couldn't go through with killing Ariane, that she had failed to keep that promise, that the memories are all now in sync, and that this is it. This is the point we were finally meant to arrive at. Finally, you come upon the cryopod, where we finally find Ariane, barely clinging to life as she is laying in the fluids of the pod. However, when Elster states she came back, Ariane doesn't remember her. And despite everything, despite all the heartbreak, all the pain, all the torment and loss upon getting to this point, Elster says that it is okay, only wishing to stay by her side a little longer, collapsing before Ariane places a hand on her head as the two possibly die together in this place. This game explores a lot of heavy themes and a lot of tragic ideas that it meshes so well together that honestly, it is better to go into this blind more than anything, to get the full effects of the story in full and the impact that it provides. Now, I had gotten the memory ending, as it is one of 4. I know that there is an ending that is considered good, but given how this story presents itself, there is no true happy ending for anyone. Thank you so very much for watching. This is only one review this year. There is also another big project coming next month, one I've been wanting to talk about for some time ever since I read it. I'll see you next time, lads.